Welcome to the 2017 House of Delegates Forum, co-sponsored by the Montgomery County League of Women Voters and the Montgomery County, Radford City, Floyd County branch of the NAACP. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I would ask you to please note that this forum is being videotaped by the Town of Blacksburg videographer and will be available on YouTube with a link to www.lwvmc.org. That's lwvmcva.org. It will be replayed on both the county's local access TV channel 190 and Blacksburg's local access channel 2. These are usually available a couple of days following the event. In addition to the forum guidelines you've received, the candidates have submitted a brief bio and answers to pertinent policy questions. Their responses have been printed without edit in the League voter guides. Copies of the voter guides will be on the League website and paper copies will be in the public libraries. During the evening, you are encouraged to submit questions on the index cards distributed by volunteer helpers. All collected cards will be reviewed by the screeners, mostly for duplication, and passed along to the moderator. Tonight's question screeners are Carol Linker, Alvin Humes, and Carolyn Rude. And the timers tonight are Tamara Hodston and Allison Wilson. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question and an optional 30-second rebuttal after all 6 answers have been given. Please reserve all applause until the end of the forum, which will conclude with a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. And now it is my privilege to introduce this year's candidates. The 12th House District candidates are Chris Hurst and Joseph Yost, Incumbent. The 7th District candidates are Flourette Kettner and Nick Rush, Incumbent. And the 8th District candidates Steve McBride and Gregory Habeeb, Incumbent. For the first question, parts of all of your districts are suffering from a struggling economy and declining population. What should the General Assembly do to help these struggling counties in Virginia? Mr. Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Warren, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the Montgomery County, Radford City, Floyd County branch of the NAACP for having us here tonight. Our economic situation here in Southwest Virginia is in a state of turmoil, and as the New River Valley continues to see a growth from some sectors, we need to look at making sure that we take what we have with our higher education system at Radford University and Virginia Tech and make sure that it turns into commercialization. We don't have enough families staying here. We don't have enough graduates staying here, and I think the General Assembly could do more to have more tax incentives to encourage more high-tech industries to stay here, to encourage more heavy manufacturing to stay here, and also any county that shares a state line with West Virginia to want to move to this area to make it worth their while. One thing, though, that I think is critical is that we look at the average median income and fight to make sure that we do increase the minimum wage in the Commonwealth of Virginia so that we can make sure that we have good paying jobs for all of our residents across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Mr. Yost?
Well, I think it's critical that, one thing, we support our higher education institutions with Virginia Tech and Radford University, and especially New River Community College, all being located in the New River Valley. Over the last 6 years, I've been proud to support, in particular, the Virginia Tech Carilion Research Institute in Roanoke, and have advocated for millions of dollars of funding, particularly for their brain research program. And what they're doing down there is just phenomenal in terms of taking that research and information that they're gathering from those programs and commercializing it and turning it into real-life things that actually help people. There's many other things we can actually do as well, including supporting our local agricultural community. That is one of the biggest and top industries in the Commonwealth. And then in my native Giles County, supporting our agritourism and other types of tourism initiatives, we've seen such a growth over there and utilizing our natural resources, whether it be the New River, the Appalachian Trail, and other natural resources.
Thank you. Mr. Rush.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank y'all for having me, the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. The question was, what can the General Assembly do? And I'd like to point out a couple things that I did in the last 2 years of the General Assembly. I co-sponsored the port tax credit. Virginia has one of the most vibrant ports on the East Coast. I think it's the second most used on the East Coast. And there were existing tax credits that were used around the port. What we did was expand that to the rest of the Commonwealth. It's already been used twice in the 7th District. It was used with a Volvo expansion and a Hubble expansion. Those are good paying, heavy manufacturing jobs. Volvo is a world-class manufacturer. This past session, I was able to get through the General Assembly a venture capital bill, which concentrates on our high-tech industries in Virginia. Virginia's been at a disadvantage with venture capital. We get about 1.7%. I wanted to improve that, so we gave tax incentives to venture capitalists to come invest in Virginia businesses.
Thank you. Ms. Kettner.
Yes. Well, one thing I want to make sure is that we are focusing on the small businesses we have locally, because I feel that they are the basis that helps our economy in this area. One of the ways I think we need to help them is to ensure that our technology is up to date in the area, and one of the best ways to do that is to ensure everybody has internet in every section of our district. And I feel that the best thing that we can see from this is it's going to advance our education abilities. Our children aren't going to have to leave the area, so they can stay where they want to grow up and live. And I feel that we are going to impact the small businesses by giving them the ability to have better equipment, stronger equipment that accesses online and gives us the ability to expand what product they can have and where it can go. Thank you.
Mr. McBride.
Thank you, League of Women Voters and NAACP, for having us tonight, and thank all of you for coming out to listen to us talk about these issues. In the Go Virginia report that was released most recently, one of the #1 areas of opportunity to improve our regional growth was listed as basically worker preparedness, making sure that we have workers that can do the job. And I think many people have hit on our higher education system. Also, I believe we need to have a focus on our community college system and our vocational schools. So I would like to have a free community college vocational school program statewide, similar to programs that we have in counties throughout the region that just can't service the full population.
Thank you. Mr. Habeeb.
Thanks, Charlie, and thank you all for having us. You know, in the audience today are two of my favorite former delegates, Delegate Schuler, who was my delegate growing up in Christiansburg, and Delegate Nutter over here. And the reason I point those gentlemen out is because they had a real commitment to this region on a totally bipartisan, non-ideological basis. And we are seeing the fruits of the labor those folks did and that our delegation has done over the last few years. The reality is, while parts of Virginia and parts of our region are struggling, we've actually turned a lot of corners. Our unemployment rate's down, our average wages are up, although not high enough. Our economy is diversifying, all that's great. I represent Craig County, though. That's a totally different set of needs than Salem, Roanoke County, and Montgomery County they also represent. I was proud to support Delegate Rush's bill this year to recognize that some of our schools that have dropping enrollment are hurting financially, and we're able to get more money into that locality. Ultimately, people stay where the schools are good. They stay where their kids can be educated and work. I'm proud of the work we've done, and I'm proud of what we're going to do going forward.
Thank you. Are there any rebuttals? The second question, and we'll begin with Mr. Yost. Governor McAuliffe's Executive Order 50 created a policy prohibiting the legal carry of handguns into state agency buildings. This was done without any prior problem, no vote of the General Assembly, and despite a 90% disapproval during public comment. Would you vote for state agency preemption to repeal this order?
Yes.
Yes, he would. Mr. Rush.
I would vote also yes.
Yes?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I'll try. Governor McAuliffe's Executive Order 50 created a policy prohibiting the legal carry of handguns into state agency buildings. This was done without any prior problem, no vote of the General Assembly, and despite a 90% disapproval during public comment. Would you vote for the state agency preemption to repeal this order?
No.
I don't agree with executive overreach, so I would definitely prefer that this go to the House of Delegates, and I would be happy to vote yes, so we could actually see the bill on the floor of the House.
Yeah, so one of the problems that a lot of people have just with government is the perception that government's become unaccountable and non-transparent. And so wherever you are on an issue like this, the population, the citizens always have a lot more buy-in and acceptance when something goes through the democratic process. So as the question pointed out, this was really a reaction to a non-problem. Frankly, the change hasn't caused any problems, but the process is wrong. And so frankly, wherever you are on the issue, I think that the proper way to do that is allow a robust democratic debate. I've never seen a bill to repeal that. I don't know that anybody intends to put one in, and the executive order will expire when Governor McAuliffe's term ends. But just from a process standpoint, you'll hear me talk about process a lot. I'm a lawyer, it's what I do for a living. The process matters, and citizens have to have buy-in to the process.
Thank you. Any rebuttal comments? Mr. Hurst?
Right, sure. I agree with some of the other comments that have been made, that I think that any issue, especially one that is of such public discourse and of disagreement, deserves to be debated on the floor of the House of Delegates, and deserves to be debated on the floor of our General Assembly. And I think that we also needed to look at the rational need of whether or not this executive order was in fact proper. So while I support the governor in the executive order itself, I think that we must do a better job of making sure that these issues are debated on the floor of the General Assembly, not done by our executive.
Thank you. Now, any rebuttal remarks on this comment? Okay, Mr. Rush, you will begin with an answer to this question. The reason there are 6 candidates here tonight is because Montgomery County has been badly gerrymandered by the Republican legislature. Of course, the Democrats did their share of gerrymandering when they were in power. If elected, will you work to end gerrymandering? If so, how?
Yes, and I was a victim of gerrymandering. Many, my good friend Mary Biggs is here tonight. She may remember when I ran against Delegate Schuler, who had a long career. I lived in Christiansburg, and Christiansburg was divided up, and Blacksburg was whole. So you can thank Jim Schuler's career for gerrymandering. I'm joking, Jim. I'm joking. That is not true. Jim had a great career. But I will say, I worked in gerrymandering. I believe that districts should be nonpartisan, compact, and be of communities of interest. And that's no one on this panel tonight has been in Richmond when legislative districts have been drawn. And so I'll work to make sure that our legislative districts are fair.
Thank you. Ms. Gedner?
Yes, I absolutely support having an independent commission to redraw our lines when the time comes. I believe something that's very important to us is to have a unified voice in our district, and I feel that as we can see here in Montgomery County, we are dividing communities and we are dividing the ability to have the voice. If we have 3 delegates in one community and they don't all get along, the voice is no longer unified, it becomes weak. And in order to keep our representation proper, we need to understand what it is everybody is looking for and what they need. So I feel that having lines drawn by somebody who has no idea what the partisanship is in an area helps keep that community voice together. So having your community have one strong voice helps us have a better representation across the entire Commonwealth. And I think that is the best reason why we should have an independent commission.
Thank you. Mr. McBride?
So I agree that we need an independent commission. Democrats have abused this, Republicans have abused this. States that have Democratic control have, heavy gerrymander in their favor. And ultimately, all gerrymandering does is silence the voters. It makes people's voice unable to be heard. In our district, we've got this very interesting finger that reaches all the way down into Christiansburg, down I-81. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to group those voters in with the rest of the district. And so I believe strongly that if we want to give everyone an equal voice, we need to draw the districts fairly.
So the reason the 8th District looks the way it does, as my opponent just pointed out, was because it was actually desired by the General Assembly to connect the Roanoke and New River Valleys in a House of Delegates seat because of the developing economic interconnectedness. The district looks the way it does because it follows the lines of the voting precincts. But from the first day I announced my candidacy, I said that what we ought to have is a nonpartisan commission propose lines that are then go through the political process that has the political accountability and goes to the General Assembly. So I propose sort of a middle ground on the issue, that having nonpartisan experts draw the lines that then have to be subject to the political process is good. I don't believe the solution to democracy is less democracy. I believe in the democratic process, and so I do think there should be some accountability in the lines. And so that's the issue, that's the perspective that I pushed since the very first day I ever ran.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst.
While we are up here celebrating the accomplishments of former Delegate Jim Schuler, I'd like to commend him for his work on One Virginia 2021. I think what they are proposing is the right way for us to move forward as a Commonwealth with an independent commission that has nonpartisan criteria to draw our district lines. And this is really exemplified in District 12 in Montgomery County and in Pulaski County. In Montgomery County, the district lines followed unnamed Jeep trails and dirt roads. It follows Glade Road and Mount Zion Road, and then hops onto Tom's Creek, and then order to go back onto Mount Zion Road and eventually pick on toward the New River. In Pulaski County, it follows an AEP transmission line. In my district, we have 34 precincts. Most of them are split up between different districts, so people at different polling places are voting for different people. All of that serves to disenfranchise the voter, which I think needs to end. We need to have more fairness and accountability in our lines so you can have it in your politicians.
Thank you, Mr. Yost.
During my time in the legislature, I've supported efforts to provide a fairer redistricting process. 2 years ago, I believe it was, late Senator John Miller carried a bill to put on this ballot a referendum for an independent commission in the Commonwealth. And I've also sponsored other bills or co-sponsored other bills that go towards ensuring that districts are compact and follow other criteria and contiguous, which I think is important. One thing I will point out, Montgomery County does have 3 delegates that represent it. I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world either. When you look at Northern Virginia, Fairfax County has 18. So sometimes there's strength in numbers, especially when during the General Assembly there's consistently a fight. It's not necessarily between the parties, but it's between the geographic regions of the Commonwealth. So sometimes having more delegates making up that area is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, Charlie, let me add one more comment. Just factual issue. One reason Montgomery County has more split precincts is Montgomery County was one of the only counties to do its county redistricting after the General Assembly did theirs. So when the bill was actually proposed, there were very few split precincts. Then a lot of them got split by by Montgomery County's changes. The other issue is I would echo what Delegate Yost said. There's all kinds of downside to having a jurisdiction split up. The upside is to have 3 voices in one, and that's been very effective for Montgomery County.
Mr. Rush.
Well, and I'll point out, I have constantly voted against the version of an independent commission in the General Assembly because it was not independent. What it allowed was the Speaker of the House to appoint members of the commission. It allowed the minority leader, the lieutenant governor, the minority leader in the Senate, or the person not of the party of the lieutenant governor, and then the governor to appoint, and then the Virginia Bar Association president was put on here. Now, who in here knows who the Virginia Bar Association president is other than Gregory? So there is no way that I will cede my authority as an elected member of the House of Delegates to an unelected politician. I love the Speaker of the House, but I'm going to go out on a limb. He doesn't know the difference between Blackstone and Blacksburg. And he doesn't know the difference between Fairfax and Floyd. And we need people who know the districts, know the areas, so we can have these compact districts that are so important that we all want.
Any other rebuttal? I have a very similar question, so with your tolerance, we'll use the same order in the responses.
Oh, no.
The responses might, well, we'll see. It's similar. How can we get redistricting legislation out of committee and to a public vote?
Well, you have to have a good bill. So that's the key. I will vote for a bill that puts criteria in that makes sure that our districts are compact, they are nonpartisan, and they have communities of interest. I think Delegate Habeeb made a very good point. The New River Valley and the Roanoke Valley, over my 26 years in public service in Montgomery County and now the 7th District, have grown closer together. There used to be, when I first got elected to the Board of Supervisors, took office in 1992, there was this competitiveness. No one talked. And then we have now become much, much closer with Virginia Tech, the research folks going on down there with Carillion and their large presence in the New River Valley. So we got to make sure that our districts are nonpartisan, compact, and have communities of interest.
Thank you. Ms. Kettner?
Yes. I think having an independent commission draw the lines is probably the best choice. However, in order to give it more of a vote, I believe that what we need to see is having them draw on multiple options and then mixing those with the General Assembly and the local government. I believe the local government understands their communities a lot better than Fairfax will understand Floyd. So I believe that having the local government look over the districts to have an idea if we're dividing an entire community in half, or as we see here, 3 ways, such as Blacksburg, where we have Virginia Tech divided in half. I think that giving the local a little bit of foresight into where we're headed can help with the impending votes if it does go to state legislature.
Mr. McBride?
So, I mean, it is important to get it out of committee, and this is not my expertise, so it's probably not appropriate really for me to defer to my counterpart here. He can explain it better, but I think we would actually have to have a constitutional amendment and not a bill. Greg?
Yeah, so it's kind of a process question, so I'll give a process answer and then a tactical answer. So it does have to be a constitutional amendment. The problem with that is, and my old government teacher, Ms. Rush, sitting there is happy that I know the process, right? So you have to get it out of the whole General Assembly, both bodies. It doesn't go to the governor. It then has to be done exactly the same way a second year. It doesn't go to the governor. Then it has to go on the ballot and it has to get approved by the citizens. So frankly, it's not really a question of getting out of committee. It's this long haul process of getting it done. The reality is, my guess is the courts are going to refine the constitutional application, the one man, one vote rule anyways, and so that's probably what's going to drive it. I'll also point out again, as I think about Delegate Nutter and Delegate Schuler here, when I was a kid growing up in Christiansburg, my delegate was Delegate Schuler. His colleague, also representing the New River Valley, was Morgan Griffith in the Roanoke Valley. His seat went from Salem to Christiansburg back then. So there's been a long history of connecting these regions, and I'm proud to get to be sort of the vehicle for that going forward.
Mr. Hurst?
Yeah, and just to pick up on what Delegate Habeeb was talking about, it seems very complicated, right, in order to get this actually to you, the voter, to be able to vote on. And I think that's fundamentally one of the problems that we have in Virginia, is that we don't have enough opportunity for direct democracy here in the Commonwealth, that a bill has to get passed 2 years in a row identical in order for you, the voter, to be able to vote on it. And that doesn't just extend to district lines, which I think is very important for us to be voted on as a people, as a Commonwealth, but also matters of what the minimum wage is going to be. What are we going to do with our medicinal marijuana laws in this country? What are we, in this Commonwealth? What are we going to do with so many other things that other states put on the ballot, but we don't have any opportunity for referendum, any opportunity for initiative, any opportunity to put things on the ballot without it having to go first through the General Assembly? And I think that's a problem. I think if enough people want to rise up and put something on the ballot for the entire Commonwealth to want to vote upon, I think it should be allowed.
Thank you. Any rebuttals?
I need to go.
Oh, please.
Well, I think there's really two different ways to go about doing this if you want to do it. You can do the constitutional amendment, because the Virginia Constitution does lay out the process for redistricting when we draw the lines every 10 years. But you can also go through the referendum way and do the non-binding referendum or a referendum, which would just be a simple bill, so you wouldn't have to pass the bill 1 year with an interceding election followed by another year, and then the actual have the constitutional amendment on the ballot. I think the way we go about amending the Constitution in the Commonwealth is pretty purposeful, because we don't want to consistently change the Constitution, so it makes it harder to do that. Sometimes they pass. Last year they didn't pass. And so, I think when we talk about this, I think the things that Delegate Rush outlined.
No, ma'am.
No, he has a minute.
Yeah. Okay. I think. I think the things that, Delegate Rush outlined and that Delegate Habeeb and everybody else has talked about in terms of compactness and continuity is very important. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out, I've carried bills over the last several years to actually fix a lot of the precincts in Montgomery County because it is a problem. I've got precincts in my district where I have 3 voters or 2 voters, and the governor has consistently vetoed those, unfortunately, which has continued to cost the taxpayers money.
Thank you. Now, are there any rebuttals?
Yeah, I'll jump in very briefly. Yeah, I think Joseph hit on a couple important points there. One of those is the fact that we actually have tried to fix the Montgomery County issue after Montgomery County redistricted and split all the precincts. We've come in every year and tried to fix those, and the governor's vetoed them. I'll let the governor explain why he vetoed those. That's been a little bit frustrating. The other thing that Joseph hit on is there is a method to the madness of the process in Richmond. One thing about the Virginia process is it avoids these sort of wild swings. Now, the dilemma that creates is sometimes change is hard. Change takes time, change takes commitment. But on the other hand, there's a consistency in government that businesses, schools, and citizens appreciate, so we try to balance that.
Thank you very much. Any other rebuttals? Ms. Kettner, will you support single-payer Medicaid expansion for all Virginians?
I actually just came out on Monday this week in support of a single-payer option for the state of Virginia. You can find it online. I do believe that we have the ability to ensure we have health care for everyone. And the one problem we have is it will take a while to implement. It will take a while to pass the House. So in the meantime, I support expanding Medicare and Medicaid and reinstating CHIP just to ensure that our children and our elderly are covered.
Mr. McBride.
Yeah, I also support a statewide single-payer system. Currently, Virginia's people and the businesses in Virginia paying for group plans spend almost $40 billion a year on insurance. Under the proposed plan that Ms. Kettner and I signed on Monday, that burden would be brought down to half that. It would be down to about $20 billion for the people and the businesses to pay. So that, I believe, would be good for Virginia's economy by freeing up money for our businesses, and good for the economy by freeing up the available income to our workers as well.
Yeah, I don't support an Austrian socialized model in Virginia. I understand and appreciate those who do advocate for that. A $23 billion tax increase, as they indicated in their own press release, which was an unprecedented tax increase in Virginia that would literally double the size of the general fund. I just don't think that's the right approach to go about doing that. Vermont tried something similar. It's not working very well. We're seeing some more problems in other states. I'm sure we'll get to Medicaid expansion, and we'll talk about that. I do find it interesting that 16 candidates for the General Assembly announced their support for this, but not a single elected official so far has done it. Their own candidate for governor, who is a doctor, has not come out and supported it. Their leaders on the budget committees have indicated no willingness to go there because they understand the problems it create for the budget. So I think those that advocate for it are well-intentioned and are trying to do the right thing. I just think that's the wrong way to go about doing it.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst.
Yes, I was not one of the 16 Democratic House of Delegates candidates who signed on to this idea of having single payer in the Commonwealth. As Delegate Habeeb said, Vermont has tried to do this and has not been able to figure out a way to fund it. Colorado put it onto the ballot last year and it got soundly defeated. California has tried to figure out a way for years to be able to have single payer in their state without being able to figure out a way to pay for it. So until we can figure out a way to pay for it, there's no way that we would be able to have universal health care in the Commonwealth. That's disappointing when we still continue to deny Medicaid expansion in this Commonwealth. That would give 4,000 people in my district access to health care. That would give 400,000 Virginians access all over the Commonwealth, the ability to see a doctor and get insurance coverage. But I do think we need to look at the overall cost of care too, right? We can't just look at giving more people insurance. We also have to look at fee-for-service to bundled care. We need to look at the overall cost of care. Why it costs $4,500 for a CT scan and $900 for a Tylenol pill when you're in the ER? Those things are all very important that the General Assembly needs to take a more active role in trying to contain.
Thank you. Mr. Yost.
Yeah, I think it was hit perfectly earlier, this potential system could be an absolute disaster for our budget. You know, Virginia's budget, we are required to have a balanced budget every year. We go through some wild swings depending on what's going on with the federal government. Even with our traditional Medicaid program now in the Commonwealth without expansion, Medicaid grows at 8% a year. The general fund, general revenues grow at 4% a year. It just would be impossible for Virginia to absorb a $23 billion increase in our budget without potential cuts. If something happened down the road, other states have tried it, hasn't worked. Well, you only have two options at that point, either tax increases or cutting. Neither one of them are necessarily popular among anybody. And when you start cutting, you're going to start cutting things away that are really important to a lot of folks, such as K through 12, mental health services, public safety, transportation, all things that are vital. I think all the proposals are well-intentioned. We all want to try to help people, but when you're in an elected leadership and in your elected office, you have to make tough decisions, and we can't think from now. We have to think 10 years, 20 years from now where we're going to be.
Thank you. Mr. Rush.
Thank you. I think my colleagues have said a lot, but I'll tell you, I do not support a single-payer system here in Virginia. I think Delegate Habeeb said Vermont has tried this. Vermont is uniquely located with Maine and New Hampshire, not uniquely, but they're located at the very northeast of the United States. Virginia is in the mid-Atlantic, and so we're within a day's drive of about 40-50% of the population of the United States. The one problem, or one of the problems with the ACA or the Affordable Care Act, is adverse selection. So what you would see is dramatic tax increases in Virginia. So your healthy folks who are making a good living, let's take if you work for a defense contractor from home, you can choose any place in the country to live. You move. Then other folks would move into Virginia who were sick. What would that do to our budget? And if we had 1% of people leave and 1% other people move in, it could really dramatically affect K through 12, higher education, and public safety.
Thank you. Any rebuttals?
I would like to.
Yes.
So obviously explaining the details of our proposed plan in 30 seconds is close to impossible. But the reality is people are currently paying for health insurance. So when we say that there's going to be a tax increase, it's really all we're talking about is, are you paying Aetna or are you paying Virginia? And under the plan that we have, we're talking about a reduction in the burden of what you're paying by half. So yes, there is a tax increase, but it is actually, you're paying less money than you would be paying to your current health insurance plan.
And I have a rebuttal too, as well.
If anybody believes an expansion of a government program leads to less expenditures, got a bridge to sell you. Year after year after year, we get told, here's the projection, here's what it'll cost if we just expand this government entitlement. Every single one, they don't just miss the projections, they miss by many multiples. So the idea that, we'll just shift money from the private sector to the public sector and government will meet these numbers is just not realistic, and no entitlement in the history of America has proven you can do that.
Yeah, my rebuttal to that is that, when we look at healthcare overall, it is the only industry in which you will pay whatever the market can bear. And no one is getting tough with the providers of that care. No one is getting tough with the pharmaceutical companies who are charging us more and more for the drugs that we need. And no one is getting tough with the medical device industries that continue to run unfettered here in the Commonwealth. So no matter whether it's going to be through traditional employer-based insurance or whether it's going to be through what I think should be the proper expansion of Medicaid, we need to make sure we get tough with how much we're being charged, not necessarily who's going to end up paying for it at the end.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Quick rebuttal. Is Virginia does get tough. Medicaid reimburse our hospitals and doctors about 67 cents on the dollar. So Virginia has cost controls. We're also improving those cost controls. We're moving from a fee for service, which means you go to the doctor, they send us the bill, to a more managed care. So we have people with medical homes, and so folks are getting treatment, pre-treatment before they get sick. Those are the things we're doing currently in Medicaid, and we're having some success with them, and we want to continue those.
Thank you. Any other questions or rebuttals?
Yes, actually I do. I want to expand a little bit on what Steve said as far as we're going to be moving the money from one area to another. That is not something that we have thoroughly planned out, but this isn't legislature that's going to pass in 1 year either. This is something that we are proposing to analyze and prepare for. And one thing I can say is Virginia is not the same as the other states in this country. We are all in our own way. We all have the same amount of people in particular areas for our state, but it's not necessarily the same for Vermont. And the one thing we do have in line with Austria is that we have the same amount of people with the same amount of problems, and we deal with the same amount of issues.
Thank you. Any other rebuttals?
One thing I will say, and this is sort of piggybacking on what Delegate Habeeb said, if you look at other states that have expanded Medicaid, Kentucky, for example, I think they originally projected in their first year around $30 million the cost for that ended up being 70-some million. It's supposed to grow to over, I think, $600 million over the next 10 years. Massachusetts just announced in the last day they're going to back off their expansion because the federal government's not doing the 100% share anymore, and it's costing them way too much. They're going to start cutting the rolls of their Medicaid program. Oregon's looking at doing the same thing to fill a $1.2 billion shortfall. That's where we're at. It's not about, sorry, didn't look that way.
Thank you. I'm going to meld a couple of questions about education, if you don't mind. Incumbents, what have you done for higher education? Challengers, what will you do for higher education? And then to the secondary and elementary levels, do you support the current level of funding for education? Mr. McBride.
Yeah, I know that is a ton of stuff to answer in a minute. So I'll try to get this condensed down. I think that for higher education, my big focus is on community college and vocational schools, and that is both getting people into those programs, keeping them local so we can grow our local economy, as well as getting them in, beyond the traditional or the thought process of going into a four-year university, because in a lot of these jobs, if you apprentice with someone, you can actually earn while you learn, and it's you're not taking on this massive amount of debt that you do when you go to college. From the standpoint of K through 12 funding, I think that we are underfunding our schools. Two things that go with that. When I was sold the idea of lottery funds funding schools, it was at least made me feel like they wanted the lottery funds to go on top of the current funding. We've been replacing more and more of the funding from the state budget with all funding from lottery funds, and that is almost the whole answer.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the top priorities for all three of the incumbents sitting up here, both K-12 and higher ed, especially here in the New River Valley with two major universities. Continue to modernize our higher ed. Look, there are two industries where the price is totally out of whack: healthcare and higher ed, the two that have the most federal government involvement. We need to continue to deliver product at an affordable price. The idea of free community college sounds great to folks. The problem is community college is largely free in the Roanoke Valley. Most of our jurisdictions have free community college, and enrollment is actually falling. They're actually having a problem getting people to fill the slots. We need to focus on making the product worth buying before we can give it away for free to people. At the K-12 level, no question we need more funding. My whole family's in education. We see that every day. We did make two major changes this year. One was new lottery money, most of it no strings attached. Delegate Rush can talk about that more, as well as his 10-10-10 plan that got more money into Craig County and some of our other smaller jurisdictions to let us compete elsewhere.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst.
Yeah, so the Constitution of Virginia is pretty clear that we need to provide a high-quality education for every single student in the Commonwealth, and that's not being done right now when more than $5,000 is being spent per student in Northern Virginia than for students here in Southwest Virginia. We need to look at how much it actually costs to educate a child and then make sure that every single school division has access to those dollars by changing funding formulas, where school divisions in Northern Virginia that could fully fund their education system still get at least 20% of their funding from the Commonwealth each and every year. We need to change the way business is done in Richmond to make sure that struggling school divisions like Giles, like Radford, like Pulaski are able to get the funding that they need. We need to have fewer unfunded mandates coming from the General Assembly for when school divisions have to take huge increases in what they pay for the retirement system and for health insurance. And we also need to make sure that we support our teachers better and incentivize them to actually want to stay here instead of moving to other places in order to educate children.
Thank you. Mr. Yost?
Well, there's a reason why it's only Northern Virginia Democrats that introduce bills to change the funding formula, because if you change the formula, it's going to hurt us bad. Right now, the formula actually benefits rural areas of the Commonwealth. If you look at the raw numbers, the way the Constitution says, Northern Virginia schools get, on average, $3,100 per pupil from the state. You cannot include the local government in those numbers. Southwest Virginia students get approximately, or South Virginia schools get approximately $5,500 per pupil from the state, a 73% increase. So if you look at the actual numbers without the local money added, that is added on, that is something constitutional that it says, we actually get more money in this area, and changing that formula would be detrimental to us. During my time in the legislature, I've worked hard with our public schools to ensure that they have the resources they need. I've advocated for it. Is there more work to be done? Yes. I've put in budget amendments to provide pay increases, and also to add our teachers to the state employee health plan, because that would be huge.
Mr. Rush.
No, thank you. Yeah, I am an incumbent. Over the last 6 years, I've done several bills that have, that I believe has helped students at higher education institutions in the Commonwealth. Did the flat fee degree. I based that off of my experience with seeing my mother, who's a Radford University graduate. She was a first person in her family to go to college. She became a teacher. She has literally taught thousands of people in Montgomery County. Don't go to Kroger with her. You can't get through the aisles. But she was able to do that with my father working at the Arsenal. My father worked production at the Arsenal and paid her tuition to go to Radford University. We have to get back to that model. And so the flat fee degree incentivized universities, parents and students, and the state with more incentives to get folks into these where they know what their degree is going to cost. It's for high-need industries like teachers, engineers, cybersecurity. Am I close? Okay. And I did the 10-10-10 plan. I'm worried about
He's awake tonight.
Yes. Well, I actually am still paying off my school loans from attending Radford University myself. I originally studied education as well. And after having come from an area that was highly depressed and in dire need of money and funding for the schools, I can tell you the difference is not just putting money into the schools. We definitely need to make college more affordable and more obtainable. But we need to have the children that have the desire and the ability to go to the colleges in order for that to be successful. And we need to do that starting at home. We need them to feel that they have what it takes to be successful, and I don't think that that is what the children are experiencing these days. And I think we need to expand and enhance our local economy and government so that the schools have more money even coming from home. And with that, what we will experience is teachers who are comfortable educating properly and students who are happy with the education they're getting, and then they will be more inclined to push forward to a university level after that.
Thank you. Rebuttals, please.
Yeah, so
Mr. Habeeb and Mr.
for all time, one of the favorite lines of all challenges for all offices, nothing wrong with this, is I'm going to go fight for our fair share. I'm going to go change the formulas and fight for our fair share. Let me tell you, there are two significant funding formulas that affect us: the education funding formula and the transportation funding formula. There is only one group of people who tries to change those in Richmond. It's people in Fairfax, because they know that we are getting more money back per dollar that we send than they are. Opening those formulas up would be a disaster for us.
Yes.
So one thing that I agree with Mr. Habeeb on is that we have a drop in community college attendance, so it's not necessarily only about making it free. It's a marketing issue. I think we do have good products to sell at our community college and at our vocational schools, and people can get good paying, not low wage jobs after obtaining those degrees, but we have to market that as an option rather than just that direct pipeline into a four-year university.
Mr. Rush.
Yeah, and it's been mentioned a couple times, the 10-10-10 plan. I authored that this year in the Virginia budget. What it was for small school divisions with declining enrollment over the last 10 years. It was very successful. We were able to give Pulaski County a little over $200,000. Craig County got about $75,000. It was pulled out of the budget by liberal Democrats from Northern Virginia. They were the only people to vote against that. And so if Mr. Hurst thinks he can go to Richmond and change this formula with their help, I'm going to sell a bridge like Greg did.
Any other rebuttals?
Well, if the bridge is going to Richmond, Delegate Rush, I'd gladly be able to drive on that bridge. You know, I think that, you know, we do need more Democrats to represent Southwest Virginia in order to make sure that we can actually work with the Democrats who are in elected office in Northern Virginia. The bottom line, folks, is that we are spending less per pupil, K through 12, than we did before the recession. We are giving less money to our higher education institutions than we did before the recession. Why is that still the case when we need to make sure that education is peerless among all other states here in Virginia so that we can actually attract the kind of businesses that want to come raise their families here?
Any other rebuttals?
Yeah, I think if you look at the numbers, we have added consistently over the last 6 years since the recession, we have continued to add money to K through 12. This past year, working with a Democrat governor, McAuliffe, we made the single biggest investment in K through 12 in Virginia's history. All of us, or the three of us sitting up here, did that. You know, during my time in the House, I have worked close with our public schools to try to get them the funding they need, try to pay our teachers more, get them better health insurance. And for that, that's why for the last 3 times running for re-election, I've gotten the endorsement of the Virginia Education Association.
First, I want to commend the incumbents for having done everything they could for our education system, because there's nothing wrong with trying to advance it as we go along. One thing I do want to state is that I don't feel we should fear looking into what we can do going forward and just sticking with what we have, because one thing, if anything, our society is supposed to evolve, and addressing it and studying it and planning for how we can make changes going forth, I think is only prudent for us to consider.
Anyone else? Mr. Habeeb, how will you vote on the Mountain Valley Pipeline?
So we don't get to vote on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, but let me tell you what we do on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I've got the only 2 anti-pipeline bills passed in General Assembly. One to give the State Corporation Commission safety oversight over interstate natural gas pipelines. The second to allow VDOT to require additional funding and additional improvements up front. So we've done those 2 things. I actually represent, as a lawyer, I represent landowners fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and my law firm does that as well. We're working right now with DEQ to see if we can get some bonding requirements put in. There's a lot of things that we've done along those lines. At the end of the day, it's a FERC decision with DEQ handling the 401 water certification. We're going to continue to make the process as best we can. Delegate Yost and I hosted 2 additional public meetings this year for DEQ because they weren't having them in the affected areas. That's the stuff we can do at the state level. Sadly, we don't get to vote up or down on it, but there are things we can do, and I've probably been fighting to do those things.
Mr. Hurst.
I am firmly against the construction of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I think it's a government taking of land that's not for public use, and I think the lawsuit that's been filed by some landowners represented by a lawyer from Gentry Lock, not necessarily Delegate Habeeb, says that, and that is the primary reason why this should not happen, is because it's government taking of land that's not for public use. And we're not talking public need or public benefit here, but for public use. I do think it's important to make sure we codify that DEQ has to do their own 401 water certification process, that it can't be pawned off under the Army Corps of Engineers. I think that should happen each and every time. And I think that we need to make sure that people who are impacted by this are at the table for some of these negotiations and not on the menu. So when it comes to surveying, we need to make sure that they are able to get paid, to take time off of work, to make sure they can watch these people who are on their land, and 2, that they get access to all of the information that's collected by these surveyors so that they can use it in the future if they so wish.
Thank you, Mr. Yost.
I think, you know, the Mountain Valley Pipeline has the potential to be one of the most disastrous things for us in this area if it goes through. You know, whether it's our impact on our natural resources, the New River, the Appalachian Trail, the Cascades Day area, whether it's our historic resources, cutting the historic Newport District right in half, and other historic assets along the pipeline route, there is a huge potential for a problem here. Property rights are obviously one of our foremost concerns. There's been a bill that's been on the books since 2004 that actually gives them the right to come on your property without your permission if they go through the proper protocol, which I think, you know, is wrong. I think the court cases that are going through and allowing, you know, a private company to take your property without your permission, that is not what eminent domain was intended for. That's not what it was put into the Constitution for. Hopefully, the pipeline will not go through. It looks like DEQ and the State Water Control Board will be meeting sometime in early December to issue their ruling on that. But until then, I encourage everybody to keep up the fight because it's necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Rush.
Well, the Mountain Valley Pipeline does not run through the 7th District, but I will commend my two colleagues, Delegate Habeeb and Delegate Yost, for their leadership in the General Assembly. Greg's exactly right. He's the only one that has gotten these bills passed through the General Assembly with my support and Delegate Yost's support. I've been doing this for a while. I got elected in 1991, took office in 1992. I've dealt with these issues for a long time, and I always look to see this. Is it to the advantage of the New River Valley or the 7th District? Is it going to be environmentally sound? I'd see no advantage to the 7th District or the New River Valley for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and I haven't seen the environmental science that proves it can be done safely, so I would not support it.
Thank you, Ms. Gettner.
Yes, I am adamantly opposed to the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I have never been quiet about that. There are multiple reasons why it is not a benefit to us. Obviously, we all understand the ecological damage that we are facing by allowing it to come through. Most people are considering what happens when they're putting in the pipeline and having damages and the fracking itself, but we are looking at ecological damage that can happen from mountain shifting, and that is not something that is a quick process, not mountain sliding, mountain shifting. And it does not take much for this to happen, it just takes a while for it to set. And so ultimately, it will end up with a bill on us. It is fiscally irresponsible for the state. However, we do not get to vote on the pipeline, but I do have the ability to work on legislation that affects the water, the groundwater, the streams, and as well as our hunting lands and our farms where our cattle and chickens and food is grown, raised, and the food that we eat and the water we drink across the state.
Mr. McBride?
So I also oppose the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and I want to thank my delegate for, putting in the effort to do everything he can to stop those. I do think that we've hit on all the points. As a scientist, I believe that it's very clear that these pipelines are not environmentally sound. We're going to have lots of runoff into our water. We run the risk based on our geology of contaminating our groundwater, and all of these things are very concerning to me. And that's one of the reasons that's one of the major reasons, also along with the eminent domain for private gain. And that's why I, refuse to take any money from public utilities, because I believe that I want to have a clean conversation with Dominion and Appalachian Power and the stakeholders, and not have that sullied by accepting money from them.
Yeah, let me add a little bit.
Please.
This pipeline debate has turned very binary for a lot of people. You're either for energy infrastructure or you're environmentalists, and that's just wrong. We need to look at this pipeline and divide it away from the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. That's got its own set of issues. The real big issues here in the Mountain Valley Pipeline are two. We have very unique geology here. The karst topography in Giles and elsewhere, the mountains and the hydraulic soil on Bent Mountain are a big deal. That's number one. Number two, the companies behind the Mountain Valley Pipeline are very different than the ones behind Atlantic Coast Pipeline. If it goes bad, there's not going to be anybody there to pay the bill except us.
And a rebuttal to that, too. If I were to be elected, would be happy to work with Delegate Habeeb on passing legislation that would require EQT and Mountain Valley Pipeline LLC to be bonded for that work, limited liability companies. Building this 42-inch long pipeline is not, I think, a good idea for people who could be potentially impacted by it. But look at the long game here, folks. This is about increasing fracking exploration in Virginia, too. That's why there was a bill that was introduced that would prevent the chemicals that are used in fracking from being disclosed to the public and to local governments. It's something that my opponent, unfortunately, voted in favor for.
Rebuttal. I don't know if my opponent just doesn't read the legislation or is just purposely misleading people on legislation, because if you look at that bill, it doesn't hide from FOIA the actual chemicals that are used for fracking. It hides the recipe, the trade secrets, how they're combined and what proportions of them are. You can still FOIA the chemicals themselves, what is what you want if you're going to be groundwater testing.
Other rebuttals? We have 4 questions on this topic, so Mr. Hurst. I'm a student at Virginia Tech, and I'm concerned about my personal information being taken for political gain. Talking about FOIA. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, so obviously there was a recent news article that was talking about what an outside organization has done using the Freedom of Information Act to get a list of names, addresses, emails, and phone numbers of students at higher education institutions all across the Commonwealth. This was something that had been done without my knowledge, even though I will admit that we had been working with that group to get students registered to vote. But I do think it's important, especially considering where I come from as a former news anchor and as a journalist, I wanted to make sure that we protect individuals' privacy. So I thought it was creepy too. I didn't like it either. And I would hope that we would be able to, in the future, not have students' personal information be used for either electoral political purposes or for what has been used for many, many years, which is for marketing purposes. You used to be able to get students' information in a veritable phone book for marketers to be able to use. I think all of that is wrong.
This is an issue that's popped up not only in Virginia Tech and Radford University, but I think in other college universities across the Commonwealth. And it's something that is not only involved in political use, but is also involved in marketing for rental corporations and other housing corporations when they're trying to get new tenants and new customers. It's something that I was completely unaware of. I was actually talking to my wife about this the other day. She's a PhD student at Tech. When you register to become a student at Tech, when you sign up and go to school, you can opt out and not having this information there, but most people, I don't think, realize that it's not easily communicated. This information just should not be readily available to the public like that, particularly names, addresses, and cell phone numbers. It's just not a good situation for anybody. I think all of us are probably tired at this point in time, or are going to be tired by this point in time with phone calls and everything else, so we need to do everything we can to try to at least exempt these records from FOIA.
Mr. Rich?
Yeah, and it seems to be this issue under FOIA is a gray area. Some universities and colleges did not release the information to this outside group. It's a political group. If I'm reelected, I'll make sure it's not a gray area. I'm going to work the legislation to protect our students' personal information.
Thank you. That's good.
I support him as far as it is a gray area and it shouldn't be. However, I did not know the group was going to do what they had done. I had heard stories about it happening in other universities before I realized that it happened to all of them. And one thing I remember as a student myself entering Radford University was it was established right off the bat that your information could be used publicly if you didn't opt out. And that was also available to anybody in the public on the website. My children are currently in elementary school over at Bellevue Elementary, and when this happened last year, it happened again this year with both of my oldest children. When they came home that very first week, there was the packet, and I had to sign off whether or not their pictures could be used, their names could be used, or anything else of our personal nature or their likenesses for the school's use or for public gain, and I had a level of which I could sign this. So it is something that we are establishing in the forefront, and we need to continue to make it obvious in the future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech as well, and so I don't think that I've actually opted out, Joseph, so I should probably double check. And it's creepy, right? It makes you feel a little skeevy, and I think that that's wrong. One of the things about this that's even worse is that we can also purchase a lot of this data as well. So there are companies that have these data, and you're actually able to purchase this list from. You can actually get this information from the voter rolls, which are also available to everyone. And we accidentally messaged my opponent by a text message from voter registration data, and so some of you may have read that already. And I think and I understand the concerns and think that there is an issue with our privacy. And I'm just happy that when we were using those data, we were just doing it to let people know about an election.
So 3 points. Number one, cell phones are not part of voter registration data. That is not maintained by the State Board of Election. That is an outside group funded by people outside of the state collecting that information for cynical political purposes. Point number one. Point number two, FOIA already does exempt this information. 21 of our universities and community colleges got it right. 18 of them got it wrong. Apparently, we need to clarify it. They get legal advice from the Attorney General's office, who has given 18 of them bad legal advice. Number two. Number three, It is the most cynical thing I've seen in politics this year for candidates who are taking literally tens of thousands of dollars from groups, coordinating their campaigns with them, gaining the benefit of what they are doing, to then say, oh, it's creepy, I don't support it, but I'm not going to tell them to stop. That's their right to do it. That's what people hate about politics. It's time for candidates to be willing to say no to their big out-of-state donors. It's time for them to say, not only am I creeped out by it, but I'm demanding that you stop it. Don't do it on my behalf. Don't do it in my name. Until these candidates do that, citizens won't have faith in them.
Rebuttals?
I'd love to.
Well, I think I will need to rebut that a little bit, considering that's a direct attack on me. And we have had conversations with that group about what that information is going to be used for in the future, not going to be able to dictate what an outside group does when we have the Wild West of politics here in Virginia right now, where we have any ability for any group to be able to coordinate with any campaign that they want. And I think if we want to change that dynamic, we can certainly have that conversation. But no, I don't want any information that was used through the FOIA at Radford or Virginia Tech used in my campaign.
Other rebuttals?
Yeah, and Greg, I got it from the voter roll. I'm sorry, but okay. But with that said, I think what's really important, I don't believe that I'm pretty sure my campaign hasn't used NextGen's information. We haven't coordinated with it. I'm really proud of the work we did with text messaging. We had some really good conversations with a lot of people who didn't know about the election. And I've taken that beyond just the group that he's talking about and reached out and has asked people to message me directly as well. So I've put my phone number out there.
Thanks.
So for my rebuttal, I would call on any candidate who says the group should not use that information to their benefit to either demand they stop and get them to stop, or give back the tens of thousands of dollars in value they've gotten from them.
I would like to rebut, actually, I have not used the company for it, and I have actually reached out to them to find out if they were using the information from the schools in my district, because I did not feel comfortable with them accessing this information. I will say that I believe that we actually have obtained cell phone numbers from the voter rolls that were not reached out from another company to obtain them.
Mr. Rush?
I got wind that some folk, or my opponent's campaign was texting folks in my district. That's how she wants to run her campaign. Let me tell you how I run my campaign. I've got Nashawn, Aaron, Judy here. We work very, very hard. We go out and meet people. We go door to door. We go to festivals, and we meet constituents, and we look them in the eye, and we talk to them about the issues that are important to them. This other stuff is not something that I've done in the past, and I don't think I'll do it in the future.
Well, that was a vigorous question. About a half a dozen people in the audience have expressed concerns ranging from open carry to silencers to mass murders. Mr. Yost, what will you do to minimize gun violence in Virginia?
I think one of the biggest things we could possibly do, and I was reading the Washington Post this morning, 2/3 of all gun violence deaths in this country are suicides. So I will continue to look at and concentrate on the issues that I've worked hard over the last 6 years, including mental health issues being the number one. Since my time being elected in the legislature, we've pushed for tens of millions of dollars of mental health funding that are very much needed, and there's a lot of work left to be done. For the first time in who knows when, we've got over $10 million available for children's psychiatric care and crisis response. We've got studies going on that looks at providing mental health screenings in schools for our kids. We've got over $10 million for permanent supportive housing to provide shelter for individuals with mental illness, because without it, they're not going to be able to achieve a long-term sustainable recovery. These are issues that are important to everybody. Everybody that I talk to knows somebody who's affected by a mental health problem, 1 in 4.
Yeah, now I'm gonna say that my good friend Joseph Yost, Delegate Yost, has been a leader on mental health in the Virginia General Assembly, and this is bipartisan leadership. There's not a committee that deals with leadership or mental health that doesn't come to Delegate Yost and ask his opinion. There's not legislation that is done that they don't come to Delegate Yost and ask his opinion. We've done some things. We expanded background checks to gun shows. They're voluntary. They seem to be working. We did a bipartisan bill with the governor's office, support from the VCDL and the NRA. We think it's working. We think let that have a chance to work. And if you look at the Washington Post opinion piece that Delegate Yost mentioned, they say when we try to make politics out of these national tragedies, it just pushes people to the side. And there's ways that we can work with these issues, with these subgroups, whether it be elderly men who are more likely to commit suicide, and we'll let Joseph work with those guys. Sorry, I was told to stop.
Ms. Gedner.
Yes. I do not believe that we should make light of any national tragedies, but we do need to take them heavily into consideration because it is becoming an epidemic that we are having people resort to gun violence, and quite honestly, we are looking at more than just mass murders and mass shootings. We are looking at private homes where you have a couple that has an issue and then we find out that one of them has been shot. Recently, there was a young girl who was shot in the head by a boyfriend that her parents didn't know that she had. And it took them a while to figure out what happened. And it really was as simple as having guns that they shouldn't have had in the first place. I believe we need to restrict what types of guns are available. Obviously, I grew up in this area, and I believe that the ability to hunt is important, and to take care of your home. But I do believe we need to restrict what options are available and who is able to carry them, and expand our background checks.
So one of the major problems that I see with any sort of gun legislation is that the federal government won't give funds to do actual peer-reviewed scientific research on gun violence. And that legislation, I think, has hurt our ability to make progress. So we can never have a conversation when we get to these national tragedies because it's not the right time. But we also don't have, and to an extent, I understand that. We shouldn't politicize the death of people. But we also need to be able to get peer-reviewed actual research. We need to get funding so we can figure out what is the best way to legislate so we can reduce it. Is it solely a mental health issue, or are there some restrictions of access to weapons for people who have a history of domestic violence, or maybe might be thought to want to use a weapon to harm themselves or someone else? Is that the better way to do it? And we got to do the research first.
I do think the bipartisan gun bill from a few years ago, while probably not going far enough for anybody on any side of the aisle, was a major statement that Richmond can work on a very tough issue when people come together. That was exciting. I was proud of that. I think it advanced the ball in a positive way that everyone got on board with. The reality is we as a society have a violence problem. It's broader than just gun violence. We're broken as a society. Our institutions are failing. Our families are failing. We're not raising our kids the right way. Gun violence gets in the news when there's a single catastrophic event, and it should be. I don't say this to minimize that. But every single week in America, there's violence all over our country where at least that many people die. We have cities in America that have that many people die on a weekly or monthly basis through gun violence, because of poverty, because of drugs, because of mental health, all those comorbidities coming together. We need to find a way to get the politics out of it. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how you get the politics out of it, but we proved it a couple years ago it can be done, and I hope we continue to find ways to address the brokenness in society.
Mr. Hurst.
I think we need to continue to have this discussion all the time, and it can't just be whenever we have mass shootings or whenever we have acts of violence that are done for public acclaim or done for infamy. I think the legislation that was done a couple of years ago was a good start. It had a possession prohibition for abusers who were under permanent protective orders. But we know the most vulnerable time for someone who's taken that courageous step to go out and get a protective order is in that first 72 hours. So let's look at maybe expanding possession prohibitions during emergency and temporary protective orders as well, so that when especially women go and try and get the court to do something about the person who is abusing them, that it's not just a piece of paper. I think that's very important too. This whole issue should not be politicized down to either you like guns or you don't like guns, you like people who like guns or you don't like people who like guns. There are fundamental values we need to clue in on, and that is we all want to see fewer people die from gun violence when more people die by gun in Virginia than in car crashes every single year now.
Is it rebuttal now?
Rebuttals, please.
You know, I appreciate what Chris just said, and Chris and I have known each other for a long time. The bill that he just outlined to allow domestic violence victims to defend themselves, we actually passed in the General Assembly. We actually did that exact bill. The governor vetoed it. So it's not the law in Virginia because the governor vetoed it.
Any other rebuttals?
I think that we have not taken enough time to truly establish what violence has been caused and why. I have 3 young children, but 2 of them are in schools, and they have to come home periodically with sheets of paper telling me about how they had to experience gun violence training and how to hide. And I think this is something that is very, very important, and we need to address it. And I will not stand back until we have at least had proper studies, as Steve has mentioned.
Anyone else? This will be the final question. Mr. Rush, what is your position on no excuse absentee voting, early voting, and the restoration of voting rights for felons who've completed their sentences?
Well, thank you.
Or you go in a room and close the door and stuff.
I guess I'll do the last question.
Freak the kids out.
Give me the 3 things again, I'm sorry.
Sure. Early voting, absentee voting, and the restoration of voting rights for felons who've completed their sentences.
Well, I've supported restoration of rights for nonviolent felons in Virginia. Delegate Habeeb, since he's been down there, has proposed this. It will take a constitutional amendment. What the governor did was just wrong. He arbitrarily, through executive order, restored all these rights. The Supreme Court told him he couldn't do that. We've expanded absentee balloting. But what I don't want to do is have, I think a term that was used here earlier was the Wild West for voting. I do not support same day registration. It could be chaos with our registrars. And right now we have where foreign governments are trying to hack Virginia's electoral system. If we were open this up too much, it could be chaos at the voting polls and for our registrars.
Thank you. Ms. Gedman.
Yes. I believe that we should make it more accessible for our felons, our nonviolent felons, to explore having their voting rights back. Currently, I believe we had attempted to pass some bills for the past few years on restoring their right to have a weapon, but I feel that before we let them have guns, we should give them the right to vote so they can vote on who is representing them for those other choices. And I also believe that we should consider expanding how often we reach out to our voters that have not already registered to whether or not they would like to register, because not everybody realizes they aren't registered. And I think that we need to make it more accessible for them to have ballots early, and maybe even consider being able to do it more often online and have them reached out to if they haven't already been reached to before.
Mr. McBride.
So this is maybe the one thing that I agree mostly with my opponent on, and I'm very proud that he's introduced that legislation to restore voting rights to felons. My mother was a felon. She actually, I guess she still is, right? That doesn't change. But she had her voting rights restored by the executive order. And I really appreciate the governor's decision to do that, because the legislature hadn't picked up Delegate Habeeb's legislation. I do support, I think better than same-day registration would be automatic voter registration. When you turn 18, if you have an identification with the state, you're automatically registered to vote. You're a citizen, you get to vote. From a standpoint of absentee balloting, I think we should have no questions asked absentee balloting as well.
You know, access to voting is sort of fundamental to participation in democracy. It's something that I fight for every year in Richmond. I think Delegate Yost and I were the only 2 Republicans to vote against one of the voter ID bills a few years ago. I voted against the voter ID for absentee ballot bill a couple years ago because I don't think it served a purpose. But restoration of rights is probably the single most thing that I'm passionate about that I fail on every single year. And I'm going to continue to fight, and I'll continue to fail if that's what it takes. The problem you have, wherever you are on the rights of felons to vote, the idea that we would vest the power to make that determination in a single man or woman who happens to win an election and happens to live in the governor's mansion is just wrong. We need a system where we bring people back into the system. One of my favorite days of the year is Election Day. Not because I'm on the ballot, not because I'm unopposed normally. It's because I get to take my kids with me to vote. I get to give them a civics lesson right there and teach them what it means to be part of society. I want everyone to have that opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst.
Yeah, I'm in support of all of the measures that were mentioned in the question, and think that we have a long way to go in Virginia to make sure that we enfranchise more voters rather than continue to disenfranchise them. I think unfair and unreasonable and strange-looking district lines goes to that. People look at where their district lines are, and they are disenfranchised because they don't really know for whom they are actually going to vote. We need to make sure that we have better options of getting people IDs, as long as we're going to continue to have an onerous photo ID law that's required in order to go to vote. And I also think that we do need to have automatic voter registration that happens upon turning 18 or getting a driver's license. I think that that would help alleviate some of the concerns that Delegate Rush highlighted with having same-day registration. But we want more people to want to go and vote, and we have a long way to go in this Commonwealth when expected turnout for this election might only well be between 35 and 40%. We can do a lot better.
Mr. Yost.
Yeah, I think, I'm fairly certain I've actually co-sponsored some of Delegate Habeeb's bills over the last couple of years for restoration of rights. I'm a big believer in second chances. I'd hate for somebody to judge me on my worst day of my life. But voting is one of those fundamental just rights that you have. It's one of the easiest rights that you have. I see no reason why you can have no excuse absentee voting. Unfortunately, bills that we've put in over the last 6 years, at least I've been there, have been defeated. I have put in legislation just this past year that actually expands the eligibility for your excuse to vote absentee to those who are protected under domestic, under a restraining order, because we were approached by our local registrars. There was a concern about when you go vote and you have to publicly state your name and address. They didn't want to do that. They couldn't use their P.O. box, but they couldn't vote absentee because it wasn't an excuse. And so we pushed that forward, got it signed into law by the governor. And the one last thing I'll say, October 16th, the last day you can update or change your voter registration, so do it.
Are there any rebuttals?
Yeah, let me not rebut. Let me take a step further. Restoration of felons' rights, political rights, gets a lot of attention. We as a society need to be willing to welcome people back in all ways, whether it's housing, whether it's jobs, how they educate their kids, access to job training. The reality is one of the biggest problems in our criminal justice system is the recidivism rate. Once you're in the system, it is so hard to break out of that. So being able to vote is part of it. It's very, very, very important to me. But everybody I talked about this issue tells me I'd give up my right to vote if you could help me find a job. Get them jobs, get them housing, bring people back into society.
Mr. Rush.
Yeah, and not a rebuttal, but a quick point, is I work very hard and with my staff to provide great constituent services. Judy Lynch is here. She's my legislative aide. We work really hard for the constituents of the 7th District, all people of the 7th District. We work hard to restore people's rights. We've helped them go through this process until we can get an automatic restoration. I'm so happy that earlier this week, I got an email from a guy who I helped get a pardon, who wants to become a police officer. And it was a 3 or 4 month process. When I got that email, it was really cool.
Anyone else?
Yes, I actually look forward to helping more voters have the ability to vote at the polls and have absentee voting options at home. I do know a few people who have had their rights restored, and with that they felt more confident in being a member of the society that they already live in. And I believe we need to just enhance our community by giving everybody the option to have a voice and have a say, and there is no reason why, as Yost said, on a bad day, that they don't have that option.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just I want to point out, since he's doing a PSA as well, that if you aren't going to be in town, or if there is a reason that you need to vote absentee, you can go down and vote absentee now, or you can request a ballot to be mailed to you. If you need help on how to do that, please talk to me afterwards. I'll get you pointed in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. Habeeb, will you begin with the closing statements?
I'd be happy to. Thanks so much for those thoughtful questions, the way you ran this meeting. Thank you to everybody who participated. One of my proudest things about serving Virginia's 8th District is that I'm from the 8th District. There's only one public high school in the Commonwealth of Virginia that has 2 members of the General Assembly. It's Christiansburg High School, where Nick Rush and I graduated. It's an extraordinary honor to represent citizens. It's an even greater honor to represent your friends, your family, your classmates, the people you grew up with. And that's a real burden, and it's an honor to carry that burden. We all came in, and I came in early 2011. These 2 gentlemen came in late 2011, and I'll put our records up against anybody in the state. Our unemployment rate is down, our jobs are diversifying, our higher ed is as good as it is in the world, our K-12 education, where we always need more funding, is world-class. People move here for our schools. We have great economic diversification going on. We have new high-end manufacturing in Roanoke Valley. We have research at Creighton and Virginia Tech. The legacy that we're leaving is really remarkable, and I'm proud of that. And I'm also proud of the diversity of our representation. Joseph is the mental health expert in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Bar none, there's no debate. Nick Rush is the first member of the majority party from Southwest Virginia to serve in the Appropriations Committee in years. That is huge for us. It already paid dividends for my citizens in Craig County. Nick doesn't represent Craig County. He paid dividends for my citizens by giving that extra $75,000 to go into Craig County. That may not sound like a lot, but go to Craig County and you'll see what it is. I'm proud to chair the Civil Court Subcommittee, one of the transportation subcommittees, serve on Commerce and Labor and Rules. There's a lot to be done, but this is such an amazing time to live in the New River Valley and Roanoke Valley. I'm proud to be part of this team. I look forward to returning this team back to Richmond. Just thank you all for being here.
Mr. McBride.
Yeah, and I want to echo that. We really appreciate you coming out tonight. It's been fun answering these questions and hearing the diversity of opinions. And just to introduce you to myself, if you don't read the little handout, I am a teacher and a scientist over at Virginia Tech. I teach biology labs. I research ecology. It's my passion. I enjoy doing it. And I decided to run because right now we've got a lot of lawyers in the General Assembly, and I don't think that's representative of the people of Virginia. I felt like if we were going to have teachers and scientists represented, we needed to have one run, and I'm that person. And I really hope that I can convince you that my plans to get a free community college so we can get people trained to get good paying jobs, to make sure that we can end SOL testing, not all testing, but stop wasting the $27 million we're spending on SOL testing so we can let our teachers focus on teaching, and also protecting our environment and our property rights. And I think that's the way to go for Virginia. I know that Delegate Habeeb has been there for a while, but like you mentioned before, he usually runs unopposed, and I don't think that's not his fault. But
I try to get people to run against me.
But it's not good for the democratic process. We've got to have a diversity of opinions represented, and I hope you'll consider that when you go vote on November 7th.
Ms. Kettner.
Yes, I grew up in this area. I was raised in Floyd. I graduated from Floyd County High School. I stayed in my district again for university. I graduated from Radford University when it was in the 7th district. And this is my community. This is where I've been. I started with a hard life. I was a very poor child raised by a grandmother who was disabled. So I experienced that life. All my first years I was volunteering at the library she worked at so that I could help her, so that we could take care of ourselves. My first jobs, I gave her all of my paychecks so that we could help with the community and help with ourselves. My community raised me. I was a part of that. And that is one reason why I am best to represent them, because I understand how it is. When I go to Pulaski, I feel the exact same that I do anywhere else in my district. And when I speak with the people, we have the same problems. We experience the same issues. We all have had problems with the internet. We have all had problems with the roads. We've all had the same problems. I feel them. I understand them. My children are in the schools. My children go to a school that needs to be replaced. My cars have to drive on the same road. I had to go out of my way to get a four-wheel drive just to get in and out of my driveway during dry times, not even during the snow. I experience what my district needs and understands, and I look forward to taking that into the future and helping them with more as we all have needed it.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. Thank the League and the NAACP. Thank you, Ms. Kettner, for providing wonderful, spirited campaign. I'm looking forward to it being over, whatever the outcome. This has been a tough year for me. My two sons have been in Iraq all year. They've left in January. I'm a former veteran myself. My father's here, who's here, is a veteran. we've had some accomplishments over my last 26 years in the New River Valley, whether it's be improving schools, whether it's improving the economic development tools. Sometimes it takes a little time. 4 years ago, I was able to go to 2 grand openings of companies that decided to move to the New River Valley on industrial parks that we founded when I was on the Board of Supervisors. It took a little bit of time, but we worked at it and we worked hard. And I think voters are going to reward hard work and accomplishment. I think some of this is what motivates you. In today's political environment, there's a lot of people that are motivated by disenfranchisement from a national election. They think maybe the things didn't go their way. I'm motivated by the same things that motivated me to join the Army and become a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division when I was 18 years old. I'm motivated by the same things that motivated me to run for Board of Supervisors when I was 23, and that's to make this community better. And I mentioned when I was in the Army, I'm very mission-oriented. I like to accomplish things, and I wake up every morning with one mission in mind. That's to make the New River Valley the best place to live, work, raise a family, and retire. And we're doing that. If you look at the national awards that Montgomery County and the New River Valley have had, you'll see our successes. So, as always, I don't take anything for granted. I'll ask you for your vote this November. Thank you.
Mr. Yost?
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the League of Women's Voters and the NAACP for hosting this forum here tonight. You know, the last 6 years of my life, have been truly remarkable. I grew up in Giles County. I graduated from Giles High School, got my bachelor's and master's at Radford University. Lived in Blacksburg with my wife for several years, and then now reside back in Giles in Pearisburg with my wife Lisa and our 16-month-old baby girl Virginia. And being in the State General Assembly in the Virginia House of Delegates, it is the oldest continuously operating legislative body in the Western Hemisphere. In 2 years, we'll be celebrating 400 years of representative democracy in this country and in the Commonwealth. It all started in Jamestown in 1619. And when I walk those halls and look around and think about the men such as Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Patrick Henry, James Madison, I'll never forget the first time I walked on the floor and felt that cold tingle go down my back. And for me, this is my home. It's personal. I've never lived outside the boundaries of the district that I represent. And now it's even more personal because I do have a 16-month-old daughter at home, and I want her to have the same experiences I had growing up in Giles with great public schools and great places to go to higher ed for Radford and Tech or New River. And we've made a lot of progress over the last 6 years. Yes, there's a lot of work left to be done for K through 12, for higher ed, for mental health, but it's only just begun. And I think the three of us have worked well together over the last 3 years, and we have a proud record to run on. And I look forward to continuing doing that for at least the next 2 years, if not longer. So thank you all for coming tonight, and I hope to have your support on November 7th.
Mr. Hurst?
Well, thank you, Mr. Warren, for moderating a wonderful panel discussion, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters and to the Montgomery County, Radford City, Floyd County, NAACP, and all of you for being here tonight. About 6 months before Delegate Yost was elected as delegate, I became the youngest evening anchor in the country at the local news level at 22, replacing Keith Humphrey, who had been there for 30 years at WDBJ. And a lot of people didn't want to give me a shot. They thought, who's this Opie-looking guy trying to deliver the news to us? And so I did what I've always done, no matter where it's been, where I grew up in Pennsylvania or been here in Virginia, which is trying to just be myself and to try to listen to families about the profound needs that they have and to try to give them a voice. And I don't know about you, I just don't really feel that Southwest Virginia, the New River Valley, has a loud enough and a strong enough voice in the General Assembly right now. And so when I go and I knock on doors and I listen to families, just like I used to do in journalism, the fears and the desires are the same, that we want to make sure that our schools are better funded, that we want to make sure that our teachers don't move out of state or move to Northern Virginia. We want to make sure that our seniors are protected and that they don't have to decide whether they're going to afford rent or whether they're going to afford medications. We need to make sure that we have someone who is going to be an advocate for everybody, not just the people that vote for them. And I think it's important to talk about the history of this great Commonwealth. But you know what? It's not about where you're from. It's about where we're all going. And we all need to move forward together in order to make sure that we accomplish the mission of what I think our elected officials is, which is to make sure that we have the finest schools, the most accessible healthcare possible, the greatest higher education institutions that are funded properly by the General Assembly that we can have, to make sure that any family who chooses to live in these districts is able to live here for many generations to come.
Thank you. Please join me in expressing our appreciation. I would also like to thank the audience for your presence and participation. I focused on topics that had multiple questions, and I regret that I couldn't cover each of your questions, but thank you very much. And once again, thanks to our co-sponsors. Good job.